Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Atheist Experience. That was Depeche Mode's Blasphemous Rumors, although most of you probably couldn't tell that because it was the early introduction. Welcome back. This is a live interactive public access program. We're actually live with a studio audience again today. Yay! Sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin. This is an opportunity for atheists in the Austin area to interact with the public, answer questions, discuss current events and relevant issues, and dig into a little bit of religious studies on occasion. We'll have the number up shortly so that you can call in if you want to. This is September 17th, so if it's not September 17th when you're watching this, don't call in, even if you do see a number, and you shouldn't. The ACA is a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have weekly meetings every Sunday at 11:30 at Romeo's on Barton Springs Road, except for the third Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series at the Austin History Center, located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe. There won't be a lecture this month, September, which would normally be the 24th, is when we would have had the lecture, because on the 23rd we're going to instead go for a bat cruise. And we've been advertising this for months now, and I keep wanting to get the Batman music to back up that announcement. And I guess we're not that big on sound effects for the most part. But for more information on the Bat Cruise, it'll be Saturday, September 23rd. You can go to www.atheist-community.org. There should be something on the main page still, and if not, there's definitely something on the calendar there. As with our other events, you don't have to be a member to actually attend. This program is available for download and is also available via podcast. And so it's being spread around the world like any other good meme, and we appreciate the listeners who are writing in. For anybody who doesn't actually get through on the air today or doesn't want to get through and who'd like to provide comments or feedback, you can email tv@atheist-community.org, and that will go to everybody who's involved with the TV show, those of us in front of the camera, and the many who are behind the camera doing the work. In addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors a bi-weekly internet audio program called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. We're going to be live again this coming Saturday, the 23rd. That's 2 p.m. Central. You can go to nonprofitsradio.com for information on how to connect. The nice thing about listening to it live, it is available as a podcast. If you listen to it live, you can connect via IRC to our chat room and provide some feedback while we're talking. We don't take phone calls on that show. It's just 3 or 4 of us who ramble on about issues, and it's a slightly different view than this one. This one's kind of a atheism 101 and an interaction with the public, and the nonprofits is a little more, I guess there's a little more ranting and raving and discussing issues tuned towards an atheistic audience. So throughout the week we have a number of social events, one of them being happy hour on Thursdays. We're currently going to Ninfa's on Anderson near 183 and I-35. That's 7:30 on Thursdays. Also, after this program, which is on until 6 p.m., we go to Threadgills on Riverside. We normally get there around 6:30, maybe 6:45 at the outside. All of our events are open to the public. Any atheist or atheist-friendly people are welcome to come down, but if you're coming down to preach or proselytize or provoke, just don't bother, because we'd like to enjoy our meal and have a pleasant time. If you want to debate, if you want to explain why you think your beliefs are correct and ours are wrong, you're welcome to call in and discuss it once we actually put the phone number up. We don't restrict people to just talking about the topic. And today we're actually going to have 2 slightly different topics, so you're welcome to talk about either of those or neither. The October 22nd, we will have the monthly lecture, though, and that'll be Don Baker, who was on last week with us, and most of you are familiar with him as a co-host. And for ACA members, as a reminder, we've decided that on November 12th, which would be the second Sunday in November when we would normally have a board meeting, we will still have that board meeting, but we're going to be moving the morning brunch and the board meeting to a new site, Ventana del Sol. The information's at the ACA website. It's something new we want to try out. This is a place that offers meeting rooms along with food to nonprofit organizations specifically. So we're going to give this venue a try and see how it works. And we may end up shifting quite a few of our, if not our regular Sunday events there. Because you could have a lecture there and a board meeting and brunch and everything, and it all kind of works out nicely. So for those of you who haven't keeping up to date with the newsletters and other events that are going on. Please check in with the website. Get a hold of somebody who's at the meetings usually, or a board member. You can email me directly, president@atheist-community.org, and I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on, because we want to get everybody down there so we can get a good idea what everybody thinks about this venue. So, joining me this week is Tracy Harris. Russell was supposed to be here this week, but unfortunately there's an illness and he wasn't able to make it. So Tracy agreed to fill in at the last minute.
Yep.
Which is good, because you had tons of stuff that we didn't actually get to last time.
And I'm sure I will at the end of this show too.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. We did for those of you. Was it 2 weeks ago? No.
Yeah,
it's too much. 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tracy's talking about henotheism and other gods other than Yahweh that are in the Bible and relate to all that. But before we actually get to that, I have something that I had promised to clear up after last week. Last week I had gone off on a little tirade about the Christian God, and pointing out that the Christian God at various times either orders or sanctions, explicitly or implicitly, genocide, murder, rape, torture, human sacrifice, almost anything you can imagine. And when you pull out these examples and really look at them, often I wonder, if this is a claim about a benevolent God. Could a devil have done any worse than what's attributed to this God of particularly the Old Testament? Although the New Testament, I've got just as much problem with, because that's where you get to this idea of infinite torture for finite crimes. So I mentioned human sacrifice. One of the callers called in to basically accuse me of lying, saying I made it up, that there's no human sacrifice in the Bible that's sanctioned by God. And I, of course, told him it was wrong, but I didn't come prepared last week. I didn't have my Bible with me, because everybody needs to have one of these. Don't know why, but we do. And I didn't have the verses memorized, and we didn't get to it quickly enough. So I promised I would talk about the specific one I mentioned last week, as well as hitting a couple other examples along those lines. So if you're a Christian at home, feel free to open your Bible, and you can double check these verses to make sure that I'm not lying or making stuff up. Trust me, there's enough grotesque, immoral, just shocking, barbaric nonsense in the Bible that I don't ever have to make anything up to make it look bad. But if you want to follow along, please do. However, if you have kids, I'll try to make sure that I'm not overly gross. But and that's something else. Christians are always happy about little Jimmy, the 5-year-old who just loves Jesus, and they give him a Bible without even thinking about it. If you really are comfortable that the Bible is God's word and that it's true and it is the good book, as a lot of people say, please invite me over to read Bible stories to your kid. Does that make some of you nervous? It should. Actually, it shouldn't, because I have more respect for your children than you do, and I would never read them the stories that are in here. But if you don't think I could pick out some doozies that would shock the mind of a child, you are sorely mistaken. So we'll jump right in. The Jephthah story that I referenced last week is actually in Judges chapter 11. The backstory real quick: Jephthah was a great warrior, but he was illegitimate. He was the son of Gilead and a prostitute. So when Gilead had real sons, they didn't want him getting their dad's inheritance, so they kicked him out, sent him away, and he went off and kind of lived his own life. And then those other kids came under attack from rival clans, and they really needed Jephthah because he's a good tactical military mind and a big warrior. So they went and said to him, we need your help. We're getting ready to get into this war, and we can't do it without you. And he looked at him and said what anybody else would say: aren't you the guys who hated me and kicked me out of my father's house? Why should I help you? And they agreed that if he helped them, they'd make him the leader of the family. You get it all. You get to inherit everything, and you get to be the head man in charge. And so he agreed. And he tried to start off diplomatically by talking to this other tribe, the Ammonites, and said, hey, why are you attacking us here? What have you got against me? And the Ammonites said, basically, your tribe came along and stole our land, centuries ago, and we're just trying to steal it back. And Jephthah's answer was, God gave us those lands by making sure that we could kick your ass and take them. And if your God had given you guys the power to keep those lands, don't you think you'd be saying that God gave you those lands? And their God, by the way, was named Chemosh, which may or may not be in the list that Tracy goes over later. So we get to the main story, Judges 11:29. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead and Manasseh, and passed over Mizpah of Gilead, and Mizpah of Gilead he passed over unto the children of Ammon. Now, the important thing about the passage is that the Bible says that the Spirit of the Lord guided him as he went around collecting up his army. And in verse 30, Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, If thou wilt indeed deliver the children of Ammon into mine hand, then it shall be that whatever come out of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, it shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Now, he said, whatsoever comes out of my house. Kind of makes me wonder, what did he expect to come out of his house?
Dog.
You know, a dog, maybe a pig. I guess those are reasonable. But if you have an omniscient God, then he already knew exactly what was going to come out of Jephthah's house. So in verse 32, Jephthah passed over into the children of Ammon to fight against them. And it says, and the Lord delivered them unto his hand. Now, if you're a God who doesn't accept human sacrifice, and somebody makes a deal with you to sacrifice something that you know is going to be their daughter, then you don't honor the bargain. You don't give that misleading information. So either this passage is in error, or Jehovah honored the bargain, and he, if he was opposed to human sacrifice, you'd think he'd made this clear. So, verse 33, he smote them from Aroer and Minnith and 20 cities, and he just slaughtered all these guys. And God allowed him to do all that. And then he came home, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and dances, and she was his only child. Beside her he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her that he rent his clothing and said, Alas, my daughter, you've brought me very low, and you're the one of them that trouble me, for I opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. So basically, he gets mad at her because she had the guts to come out of the house. And now daddy's going to have to kill you because I promised God I would kill whatever came out of the house. So how do you think his daughter reacted?
Well, I know the story.
Oh, it's not fair to ask you then. I don't know why he was so shocked and saddened. He should have realized that it was likely to be his daughter. But so she says to him, Dad, thou hast opened thy mouth to the Lord. Do unto me according to that which you promised. For as much as the Lord hath taken vengeance for thee of thine enemies, even of the children of Ammon. And I guess this is King James I'm probably reading or paraphrasing from. But his daughter immediately understands and agrees to be sacrificed because he made a deal with God, and God honored his part of the deal, so Daddy's got to honor his too. And so she makes a deal with her dad that says, it's a sad thing that I'm going to have to die a virgin. Please let me have 2 months to go off with my friends and cry over my virginity. And he said, go, and he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, and she and her companions bewailed her virginity upon the mountains. So this is where I kind of cry foul, because I don't, even if the story was kind of true, I don't know any kid that would react that way, especially a young one, but maybe they did. But I'm pretty sure if you're upset that you're going to die a virgin and you head off into the mountains with your friends, you're probably having more sex than tears. Let's get this over. But maybe I'm being a little anachronistic. Maybe in those days this was all kosher, literally. And it came to pass at the end of the 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed, and she had not known man. So if the Bible is correct, she didn't go have sex. But that's important. Here you've got the Bible. This is a human sacrifice that God supposedly sanctions or endorses, or at least doesn't object to. And the Bible tends to soften the speech on what it is. He did unto her according to the vow which he vowed. It doesn't come out and say he slaughtered his daughter as a burnt offering to God. I mean, they try and make it sound as unoffensive as possible. There are scholars who have theorized that at least in the early days of what eventually became Judaism, human sacrifice was common, just like it was common among lots of other religions and tribes. We don't know that for a fact. I don't have evidence from that, but what I do have is passages specifically from the Bible. The next story, and I don't want to go on forever because Tracy's got stuff too, but the caller had asked if I was talking about Abraham and Isaac, and that's the famous story where God wants to test Abraham. In order to do so, he asks Abraham to go up and sacrifice his son on an altar to him. And of course, at the last minute, God stops Abraham from killing his son and provides a lamb to sacrifice instead. And generally, Christians look at this as a wonderful story about how much God loves us. He tested Abraham's faith, and he was never actually going to have Abraham kill Isaac, and he stopped him and blah, blah, blah. I used to see it that way too. I was a Christian for 25 years or so, and I saw it that way too, and I saw a lot of these stories like that. There's an idea among some Christians, and I don't want to lump everybody in a bucket, but we should generally be happy that God doesn't just kill us. I mean, he's God. We're his creation. We're like, ants to him. It's only because he loves and cares about us that he doesn't just kill us outright. That to me is like if there's a little tiny island nation that doesn't have modern conveniences, that you're saying they should be happy that the United States hasn't nuked them into oblivion. No, I mean, I'm sure they should be happy that that hasn't happened, but that doesn't mean that the United States loves them and is looking out for them because we haven't destroyed them yet. My problem with the Abraham story is that if you're a God who does not accept human sacrifice, if that's something that you would never ever do, it's not in your character. But you need to test the faith of one of your followers. And by the way, I don't want to overlook that objection too. Why in the world would an omniscient God have to test to find out whether or not one of his followers believes, and has faith? That's patently absurd from the start. But we'll just assume that maybe he got his kicks out of testing him. So he puts him to the test. And what's the test? He says, take your only son, your favorite son, Isaac, and kill him for me. Now, if you're the type of God that does not accept human sacrifice, and you're trying to find out if your follower actually believes in you, has faith in you, understands you, then the correct response from Abraham is, hell no. You can't possibly be the real God, because the real God would never actually ask me to sacrifice my son. Depart from me, you illusion of evil. That's the correct response if the God doesn't actually accept human sacrifice. Instead, after God says this, there's not a pause, there's not an objection from Abraham, there's nothing. He immediately packs up his stuff and his son and heads up to the mountain to sacrifice him. And this whole test is Abraham's blind faith and willingness to believe that God could, would, and did ask him to sacrifice his son was a valid thing. I mean, this was something that was within the character of the God Abraham imagined. And if God's going to reward Abraham for that kind of thought, then it just leads us all to assume that the God of the Old Testament had to, at least on some occasions, be able to accept human sacrifice. This had to be a part of that God's character, or this test is invalid and stupid. So those people who say that God, the God of the Old Testament would never do that, and this Abraham-Isaac thing is easy to shrug off, wrong. If your God would never, would your God accept cannibalism? Would he order anybody to be a cannibal? No. If you think that, then certainly your God would never use cannibalism as a test to find out whether or not you believe in him.
Can I just add?
Sure.
I mean, it's sort of the argument they use on Andrea Yates.
Yeah.
She says she heard, God telling her that she needed to kill her children, and everybody's just like, oh, well, God would never tell you to do that.
Yeah. And within Christian doctrine.
And why didn't Abraham understand that God would never tell you to do that?
Yeah.
It's according to what you're saying makes sense that Abraham obviously did accept that this is something God would say.
Yeah.
Just like Andrea Yates did.
And if the Bible's true and God rewarded Abraham for his belief that God would actually do this, then how else are you supposed to know the character of God if the numero uno guys like Abraham and David have these perceptions and God keeps rewarding them for these perceptions? How can you later on say that's not in God's character? That's just stupid. There's other mentions of human sacrifice in the Bible. 1 Kings chapter 13, there is a story where they took a bunch of false priests and burned them. Now that could be considered kind of a punishment, but it is described in the same way as a burnt offering or sacrifice. Leviticus 27, verses 28 and 29.
Well, sacrificing your enemies is still a sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's still human sacrifice.
Granted, I just didn't want to confuse it with like burning witches at the stake. You're offering, it's not really that you're doing a burnt offering as much as you're punishing the guilty. But the specific words in there actually go towards sacrifice for the most part.
Right.
There's another thing where in Leviticus, I might have mistranscribed a verse here, but anything that you completely dedicate to me must be completely destroyed. And in verses right before that, the order from God is that every firstborn child and beast must be devoted, is the most holy. Every devoted thing is most holy unto the Lord. So basically, he was saying, you must sanctify all your firstborn to me. And then a little later on, it explains that anything that you sanctify to me must be completely destroyed. There's a verse. It's Exodus 13:2 is sanctifying to me under all firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb from among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. So that's where some of the scholars are saying, this is disguised and made to look like not too much of a big deal. But it may have been at some point that human sacrifice was common, that we sacrificed all the firstborns. And it seems consistent when you consider that the 10th plague that God rained down upon Egypt was the killing of all the firstborn. That's along those same lines. There's I made a list of other atrocities that aren't necessarily human sacrifices, just in case, because it bothered me that I made this list of things, God sanctions rape, genocide, murder, torture, human sacrifice. And the caller calls up and the only one he objects to is human sacrifice, as if all those other ones are okay. Yep, they're in the Bible and it was okay for God to do it. And it kind of goes back to this, he's the potter and we're the clay. And, if he wants to crush us all up and start over on a new ashtray, he can. I find it absurd. So I took some extra notes just in case any believers wanted to say, well, the sacrifice things weren't enough, because you've got God ordering the slaughter of many other people and the taking of 32,000 virgins as bounty. Killed everybody else in town, every man, woman, child,
booty.
Booty. Every babe in the womb, they had to slice them open and remove them all. Kill every man, every woman who'd had sex with a man, but keep all the virgins. And it turns out there were 32,000 of them among the tribes that they killed. Now, my first question is, how did they know? I mean, did they actually go around and perform like an attempted violation, or did they just guesstimate and say, all the ones that are under 9 or 10, we're pretty sure they're virgins, so we'll take them? But they ended up with 32,000, and they split them up amongst the tribes, and they had to turn over 32 of them to the temple, and they were to be used as those guys saw fit. And we're talking basically about sex slaves. It doesn't actually say sex slaves, which gives Christians a way out. Well, it doesn't say they were sex slaves, so obviously you can't say they were. All right, why else do you keep 32,000 virgins? I mean, did they become regular slaves? If you wanted regular slaves, why wouldn't you keep all the strong men? I mean, the Bible specifically tells people how to mark their slaves by holding their ear up against the door jamb and driving a stake through it. So slavery was allowed. This specific instance where we're talking about virgins, and by the way, some of these stories are so important that they're actually repeated twice, only slightly different. There's other things in there, orders to kill unbelievers, something that Christians go off against Islam and say, Islam isn't a religion of peace. Look, here's a verse right here that says, kill the unbelievers. That's not peace. Well, guess what? The same thing's in your Bible. You just don't happen to bother to read it or agree with it. And like the caller who called in to say that, basically accused me of lying, saying this wasn't in the Bible, it is. I didn't know it was in the Bible when I was a Christian either. And that's why I wanted to get an apology out, because partly I was mad at myself for not having the verses in the Bible handy. And part of it was because I realized, yes, it is your fault that you don't know this, but that doesn't mean that I need to get actually nasty about it, because when I was a Christian, I didn't know it was in there either. I didn't know this story of Jephthah. And the deal is that you think you know the Bible. You may have even read it all through, cover to cover. I had, but you don't. Your mind is in such a place where you gloss over these things. You don't actually critically analyze them. You look at it as this is God and it's His justice and these people had it coming and this was deserved and this was a test and God works mysteriously and we can't understand it and all this other nonsense. But most of what you know about the Bible is just what they taught you in Sunday school. And if anything that, if you're a Christian and you didn't have your Bible open and anything that I mentioned today just didn't sound right to you, where I don't think it's in the Bible the way he's saying, go look it up. because that's the exact same reaction I had. And this was one of the things that led to my eventually rejecting Christianity and proceeding on towards atheism after I'd considered other religious options and other ideas. But yeah, Deuteronomy 13, kill the unbelievers. Deuteronomy 22, kill any woman who's not a virgin on her wedding night. It goes into all kinds of crazy stuff about there's a guy who, this one's just absurd. 1 Kings 20, verses 35 and 36. And a certain man of the son of the prophets said unto his neighbor in the word of the Lord, smite me, I pray thee. And the man refused to smite him. He's like, I want you to hit me. God wants you to hit me. Please hit me. And the guy's like, no. So the prophet says, because you haven't obeyed the voice of the Lord, as soon as you leave here, a lion will slay you. And as soon as he departed from him, a lion found him and slayed him. So, granted, you could sit there and laugh about how that prophet was just, being stupid on the part of God. But the prophet couldn't have possibly controlled the lion. This is a moral message in the Bible, specifically about God. And it's that no matter what God asks you to do, no matter how stupid it seems, no matter how immoral it seems, whether he asks you to kill your own son or smack one of his prophets across the face, you better do it or God will fuck you up. That's what comes off every single time. And so when you have people like Andrea Yates who say, God told me to, or I decided to take it upon myself to kill my kids. I had a discussion with somebody just yesterday over a forum, and it's the idea is that if you actually believe that the Christian God is true, that children before the age of understanding will go directly to heaven, and you have a couple kids, then you have two choices. You can do nothing and put their eternal soul at risk of possibly going to hell, or you could do what Andrea Yates did and kill all of them, guaranteeing that they go to heaven, even though you'll probably go to hell. Now, if you really sincerely believe this, and isn't that the ultimate sacrifice, to give up yourself to guarantee that your children will spend eternity in heaven? Of course it is. The thing is that no rational person would do that. You'd be crazy to do it. And that's one of the reasons why it's easy for me to point out that the doctrine of Christianity is immoral, irrational, and crazy. It's just that the modern, the people who actually believe it don't actually believe it. They focus on the good parts, the turn the other cheek, the be nice to your neighbors, the, help out the poor, the love Jesus, the, let's put together a soup kitchen and gather up stuff like that and do good in the world. They're focusing on that and ignoring the rest of it. And those people, I love you. It's great. Do the good stuff. We encourage that. But you have to, as long as you're going to adopt that label and adopt this book as your source of information, you got to take the bad with the good. And my point has always been, let's throw out the bad. Let's chuck all this stupid, superstitious nonsense, live a good life, do the things in the Bible that are good, not because they're in the Bible, but because they're good. I mean, I don't see how, it's just, to me, it's like a no-brainer. And I realize that it wasn't always that way, so I don't want to rattle on. There's other like porn and gross stuff in the Bible too, but I'll save it. And before we go on to Tracy, there is a phone call from Russell, who would have been on today. So, how you doing, Russell?
Hey, Matt, that was quick. I just called.
Yeah, well, you go head of the line because you were supposed to be on today.
Yeah, well, that's actually why I called, because I had a topic in mind, and then, of course, I had to take care of my poor wife. So anyway, the topic that I had in mind was basically revisiting the issue of the Euthyphro dilemma, which is sort of dealing with the concept of coming up with morality through absolutist means by saying what God says goes, versus coming up with morality through reason. And I've been having this ongoing discussion with a Christian online where basically I said, well, if God tells you to do something like rape somebody, then are you obligated to do it?
Right.
And naturally he says, that God would never tell you to rape somebody because his nature wouldn't allow him to say anything bad, which kind of cops out of the main issue, which is if you say that God is the source of all morality, then by definition anything he says, even if it's go rape somebody, should be considered a good thing.
Yeah, it becomes morality at the whim of God because he can change his mind on anything, anytime, and that becomes good.
Right, exactly. And it's not like he doesn't actually endorse things like that in the Old Testament, where I looked this up, and it's now on the Iron Chariot site under the rape heading, where it turns out that there are verses that specifically say, if you need women and you don't have enough women, go invade a neighboring tribe, kill all the men, kill all the women who are not virgins, take the virgins and take them as your wife.
Yep.
And there is not just one passage where this commandment is followed. There's at least three where it's
one of them I think is actually
more
a
or less
duplicate of the
the
same
same way,
story.
as that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, I think one of them is a duplicate of another story, but there's definitely several places.
Right. Well, I didn't know that there were three. That part kind of surprised me. But yeah, anyway, I mean, what it comes down to is even if you thought there were a God who were telling you the things that you should do that are right and the things you shouldn't do that are wrong, you'd still sort of be under an obligation to come up with or to at least recognize that there's sort of a good practical reason why you should not kill or why you should love thy neighbor, because those are pretty good principles for getting along in general.
Yeah.
And if you're not aware of what the reasoning is behind your morality, then, you could have false visions of a God telling you what to do, like I'm sure Christians would say about Andrea Yates.
And I would say about all
Christians. If you really believe that was God, then that's what you ought to do.
Hey, I don't know if you probably didn't hear me. There's a problem where you can't hear when you're talking, but Christians might point out that Andrea Yates is getting false information from God, and I'd point out that all Christians are.
Well, they're all getting false information not from God.
Sure.
Well, I'd like to add, just when I was a Christian, I was brought up in a really fundamentalist group. And one of the things, like the story of Jephthah that Matt read today, I actually knew that when I went to church. And it didn't really bother me. When I was a Christian, the way I looked at that was, Jephthah made a stupid vow. That I kind of blamed it on Jephthah. Like, well, that's his fault that he vowed that thing, And
Yeah.
then when, like the flood, I thought, oh, all those people were wicked. They all deserved it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was much older that I thought, wow, even the babies?
Yeah.
Like, even the babies were wicked? Like, a 2-month-old was wicked,
Right,
deserved
sure.
to be drowned? I mean,
Well, as long as you have anything that approaches a concept of original sin, now you've got that covered.
well, it was like
Just
any
one excuse after another.
excuse to say that, this action was okay. That's all it really took. Even the most flimsy excuse for why this would be, a justified action. And if it wasn't justified, then it was like what Matt was saying. Well, it didn't matter. It was God's justice, and I don't have to understand it. So even if it's horribly, immoral or painful or, just this awful thing that I can't grasp how anybody could ever do it, and if a human being ever did it, I'd think they were a complete monster. But somehow, if God does it, I just need to accept that that's for good.
Yeah, because moral laws are for us.
But
God doesn't have to follow.
The question becomes then, like, if you are a believer, like for myself, the question that I really can't answer is, at what point do I ask myself, how do I know I'm not worshiping an evil God? Because if all these things seem evil to me, but I just say, no, it must be good. I just don't understand it. It must be good. Well, an evil God could prey on me the same way and do whatever he wants and just tell me you have to believe it's good. And if you don't, then you're not going to make it to heaven or, whatever. But yeah, it was just weird. It's a weird mindset, and I'm glad I'm not there anymore. But when you're there, this stuff doesn't even bother you. You do, even if you are aware of it, it doesn't bug you, and you don't really see a problem. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm like Matt. I was there too, and I don't understand how I was thinking. It's like a brainwashing.
Yeah, you're basically looking at it as, I know this may actually sound bad, but I know in my heart, because God is good, that this must actually be good. And therefore, I need to rationalize some explanation to get rid of this apparent contradiction, or I just need to accept that it's beyond my comprehension, that God is transcendent and the author of morality, and so even though I might look at it and say that it's immoral, God knows better, and that there's some ultimate good that may come out of it, or anything that can get away from that. For the guys, Russell had mentioned the Youth Project. If we can put the link up for that real quick for people. But go ahead, Russell.
Yeah, well, I mean, getting back to this discussion that I had with this guy about whether God can tell you to rape somebody, first he refused to believe that this stuff about rape was in the Bible, and then when I brought up these actual instances, cross-referenced 3 or 4 times in different places in the Bible, he finally came back and said, well, God, if a person ordered somebody to go rape somebody, then that wouldn't be okay, but we can't understand what God's reason is behind that.
Yeah.
And so I basically said, oh my gosh, you actually are pretty much saying that it was okay for God to tell somebody to go rape somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's the problem with biblical morality in a nutshell. I mean, the very concept of treating some absolutist source as good no matter what.
Well,
with no reason.
And Russell, it's not just a problem with the morality, it's a problem with the entire reasoning, because what the person is actually saying is, even if I don't understand this thing that I'm promoting, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to promote it. It doesn't, even if I don't get it and I don't agree with what I'm seeing, or I wouldn't agree with it, I'm just going to tell myself that it's still okay, and I'm still going to promote it and believe it. And it's like,
Right.
How can you believe what you can't even understand, what you can't even explain?
Exactly. Well, that's all I had.
Okay.
So have a good rest of the show.
Tell Jenny to get well. We'll see you all later.
Okay.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot. Well, we're going to let Tracy go on with her stuff, and before we do that right off the bat, I got a couple of websites to kick out in my Matt's Gonna Pimp Your Project portion of the show, because one of them's mine. IronChariots.org, specifically wiki.ironchariots.org, is a counter-apologetics wiki that we've been creating. Russell and I started this along with one of the fans of the Nonprofit Show, and we've gotten a lot of authors interested. There's some stuff up there. It's still in the early stages. But for those people who would be interested in participating and providing counter-apologetics, there's a forum available at the site. You can feel free to stop by. We don't have a title graphic for it. Also, youthreferralproject.com, which is what Russell was calling to talk about. For some reason, we don't have the title for that anymore either. But you can go there. Youth Referral is EUTHYPHRO, and then project, youthreferralproject.com. And the last one, I got contacted by Martin Wagner, who used to host this long before I was ever, we did get a graphic up for Iron Chariots, long before I was ever even involved with the ACA, and while I was actually still a Christian, Martin Wagner hosted this program. He's set up a blog and invited the past and present hosts and co-hosts of the ACA or the Atheist Experience to come and contribute, and that's atheistexperience.blogspot.com. So be sure and stop by there if you're interested in the show and a lot of stuff that we're talking about. And also you can stop by and put a comment that it would be nice to get Martin to come back on the show sometime. I'd love to have him on as a guest, and he's welcome pretty much any time. So, and he and I have never met. We got to rectify that. We've talked over email and stuff, and we participated in the same projects on with the program and other things, but we've never actually met. So we'll do that. But we'll go ahead and get the number up for those people who are interested in calling in, and Tracy's going to talk to us more about all kinds of gods that most people don't know.
Well, I'll probably just hit one because I don't want to take up the whole show on it. So we'll just hit this one that I mentioned, I think, last week, and that's Nehushtan. I'll try to pronounce that.
Is that near Pakistan?
Yeah, Pakistan. No, it's Nehushtan. And Nehushtan is a very interesting, I thought he was very interesting. I'm going to call him a god in the Bible because he was a god outside of the Bible, and within the Bible he's sort of relegated, but he still appears. And archaeologically, outside of the Bible, he exists as something that was definitely created as an idol. And you have little Nehushtan idols that they found in copper mines all around Midian. And so he was definitely some form of worshipped thing. And he let's just go into it a little bit. Nehushtan is sometimes it's mistranslated in some of the Bible versions. Now, luckily, many of the Bible versions now translate it correctly as a name, but in some older translations, it was mistranslated as simply a piece of brass. It said that King Hezekiah referred to it as, called the thing a piece of brass, but really he called it by its name, Nehushtan, which is a proper name. And the International, there's a Bible encyclopedia, and I had it in my head, and now I'm like, what was this? The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia is very insistent. The quote from them is that it's emphatically a proper noun, and they go on to say that if you try to make it not a proper noun, you lose the entire meaning of the passage as far as they're concerned, and that they think it more likely comes from a word which is Nachash, which means serpent. And the reason they think this is because Nehushtan is actually a serpent wrapped around a pole. That's the symbol for this particular deity. He was located among the Hebrews in Sinai, and he also probably held a place in the Hebrew temple. And they found, like I said, lots of little Nehushtan idols in copper mines around Midian. Represented as a snake on a pole. The other connection that he seems to have is to a Greek demigod who is named Asclepius. And Asclepius was a demigod who was a healer, and his symbol was a snake on a pole, which you can't help but, see the connection there. And
Snakes on a pole.
yeah, snake on a pole. It's going to be a movie, maybe. But this is very different than the caduceus, which is two snakes wrapped around a pole with wings. And you see that all the time in the medical field. And I did read that the Asclepius snake on a pole, the single snake around the pole, was used by EMS workers as a symbol of their trade. But I didn't confirm that. It was just something that I came across while I was doing the research. And if that's true, it's interesting because he is another Greek myth that talks about healing. And that's, of course, where the caduceus comes from in medical, medical symbolism.
Is there a verse associated at all with that?
There is. We're going to get to that in a little bit. This is the Greek idea is not something expressed in the Bible. That's just sort of a Greek myth that runs parallel to the image.
Right.
And what happened is that in the story, you have Asclepius is healing people, and he's so good that he brings people back from the dead. And this sort of upsets Zeus, and Zeus kills him.
Imagine Jehovah wasn't too thrilled.
Yeah, and so this is sort of the mythological idea of somebody that's subverting an act of God. So in other words, only the gods should bring people back from the dead. And so for Asclepius to go around doing this was not a good thing, and him and his sons, couldn't do that. And so
It's like the
he was
Pharaoh's
killed.
magicians duplicating Jehovah's tricks.
That is gonna come up in this.
I ruined it.
Okay, you're already on it, and I just want to say Matt was not aware, but yeah, that's coming up. The first, I don't want to say first. It's not a first confirmed mention of Nehushtan, but the first proposed mention of Nehushtan is actually the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And they propose that because Nehushtan is thought to have been clever and wise and also related to life-giving. And so they think that he's mentioned, I did read an article that said he was mentioned in other Jewish, Jewish mythologies and stories, that there's this idea of the clever snake, and that shows up sometimes in Jewish stories. I didn't confirm that. I don't know if that's true. I don't know a lot about, just Jewish stories and Jewish mythology beyond what would be in the Bible. But this snake on the pole, the staff of Asclepius, and he didn't have, there's no sort of wives or consorts associated with Nehushtan. He's just sort of his own thing. His other titles and realms would be wisdom and cleverness and also life. And the symbol for, the reason that he gets a symbol for life has to do with his mention in the Bible. And that happens in, let's see, I sort of have to back up a little bit. We have to back up to where in Genesis there's a mention that may or may not be related to Nehushtan, which is that Dan, the tribe of Dan, shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path that bites the horse's heel. That's from Genesis 49. Traditionally, Dan's tribal symbol is a snake, and if you look at the banner of Dan today, all the tribes have banners, the tribes of Israel, and Dan's banner to this day is a snake. So you can actually go online and order the banner of Dan if you want to and get yourself a snake banner. Then in Exodus, I want to bring this up because it makes an interesting contrast to how Nehushtan comes into play. In Exodus 22-5, there's a command that's given where God says, I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. And this is extremely important because there's a footnote in the American Standard Bible that says, besides me. And the reason that's important is that besides me is the marginal note, and before me is actually what the translators chose to keep within the verse. And to me, this illustrates a leaning toward henotheism as opposed to monotheism, because they're saying the stronger translation, what we accept to be what this is actually saying, is that you won't worship something in a way that's greater than what you worship me, not necessarily instead of me. And so that's part of what we talked about last time, was the henotheism.
The note's actually in the NIV.
Okay, so it's there too?
Yeah, for the translation says, no other gods before me. And at 23 it says before, and it says the Hebrew word, Hebrew for this word is translated as in hostility toward. Something of that sense may be intended here. In any event, no deity, real or imagined, is to rival the one true God in Israel's heart and life.
Correct. He was not to rival, and that's very different than to...
Then I'm the only one that
right.
exists.
It was not a command to not worship other gods. It was a command to not worship other gods more than you worship me. And he says, you shall not make for yourself an idol. Additionally, he says, or... He doesn't say an idol that is. He says, don't make an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. So you can't form something. You can't make a statue. You can't make an idol, and you likewise can't make a statue of a thing. And there are actually some, I know there are some Christian groups that don't allow like models or statues or images of animals or people. There's, for example, I think it's the Amish that don't like their photos taken. Some of them have problems with images, and they won't have images in their churches. They won't have, anything like that.
Now we're talking about really the Ten Commandments here, and this would be
Right,
the second one,
right.
except for Catholics. Catholics chuck this one out. This one is only the Protestant, the Ten Commandments, and then the Jewish. And they toss it out because it's been interpreted too widely as you can't have pictures or statues
Right.
or anything of anything.
Right.
There are other translations, and the NIV actually mentions this as well, where it says that what's actually being said here is that God is saying, you can't make any idols that are supposed to represent me because I have no shape or form. So anything you would possibly make from heaven above or
Right.
earth below can't really represent me, so you're not allowed to do it. And that it's not in order not to have, a statue of the guy down the street or a picture of the Amish. So
Yeah, I mean, the verse is definitely open to more interpretation than what I was led to believe when I was a Christian.
I just wanted to mostly point out that the Catholics chuck it right out.
Yeah. But then he also
We don't like
additionally
that
says that, in the event that you make such a thing, you're not going to worship them or serve them, or, so you can't worship anything like this, I guess, if you didn't make it, if someone else made it. You don't worship this thing, you don't serve this thing, because God is jealous of, obviously, other gods. Jealous of what? Jealous of other gods. So you have this
Might have been
command.
why you had those guys run around killing all those people
Yeah.
who worshipped other gods.
Well, here in jealousy, just to say, is not considered as far as I'm concerned, a very good personality trait. So I don't consider. I mean, jealousy spawns from insecurity, and that's weird to me that a god would have an insecurity. But anyway, while it's important to note, let's see. Okay, I already talked about the translators in the marginal note. But let's look now at where Nehushtan actually comes into play, because it's later, it's in Numbers. So now you have this command of God to never make any image of anything that lives on the planet anywhere. And then in Numbers 21, 6-9, an interesting thing happens. Yahweh sends fiery serpents among the people, which in this case is the Israelites, and they bit the people so that many people of Israel died. So the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned because we have spoken against Yahweh and you. intercede with Yahweh that he may remove the serpents from us. And Moses interceded for the people. But instead of Yahweh coming in and taking the serpents away, what he says is, then the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a standard. And it shall come about that everyone who's bitten, when he looks at it, he will live. And Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a standard. And it came about that if a serpent bit any man, when he looked to the bronze serpent, he lived. So God instructed Moses to make an idol that the people could come to save their lives from the serpents that Yahweh sent to kill them.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, the NIV actually says, the Lord says to Moses, make a snake and put it on a pole.
yeah.
I mean, it's a more modern translation, but I don't know, the whole snake on a pole thing, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't say fiery snakes, though. It just says poisonous.
Well, and then in Exodus, Moses goes and battles Pharaoh's priests, and they happen to do something interesting. They have staffs that they throw down that the Bible says turn into snakes. The staff and the snake, again, seem to indicate that there's potentially in Egypt, which is not far from Midian, a cult of this particular staff snake happening there. And that may be why they used the staffs and the snakes, and why Moses threw his staff and his snake ate their snakes, and, showed once again God, overcomes the snake god like he did in Eden.
You're getting ready to go to John. I was just going to
Yeah,
go there.
I will go to John.
Okay.
Well, the next mention of Nehushtan comes hundreds of years later in 2 Kings, and this is about 700 BCE when they have a Reformation king named Hezekiah. And his actions are recorded in the Bible, and it says, he removed the high places and broke down the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherah, which are actually Asherah poles. Asherah was another goddess that we're going to discuss, probably not on this show, but on a future show. But Asherah is kind of interesting in her own right. But they had Asherah poles in the high places in Israel. They worshipped Asherah. And he also broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days, the sons of Israel burned incense to it. It's important to note that God never told Hezekiah to do this. So this is Hezekiah's own interpretation of a monotheistic view that he's imposing on a people who are clearly not monotheistic. I mean, these people are worshiping Asherah, they're worshiping Nehushtan, they've got him in the temple, they're burning incense to it. I mean, obviously the people saw this as an idol that was produced, and they were worshiping it like Hezekiah saw up until that time.
And not only that, but it's an idol that supposedly God told Moses to make.
Well, he did, yeah. He told Moses to make it, and that's why it's in the temple.
So God tells Moses to put a snake on a pole and to have people look at it whenever they get snake bit so that they'll be healed.
Right.
And for years and years, they've been burning incense to the snake on a pole. And
With
Hezekiah
no
comes along.
problem. I mean,
Yeah.
Yahweh's not,
'Cause he's,
Yahweh's
Yahoo?
not, yeah, well, that's actually going to, Yahweh's not saying there's a problem with it.
Yeah.
Yahweh doesn't tell Hezekiah, go in there and break this thing down.
You can burn incense to the snake on a pole, but you're going to sacrifice the little kids and lambs to me.
Well, that's your topic.
I'm just saying, you obviously love the God
Yeah.
more that you're willing to burn the bigger thing for.
But my thing is, God has this thing, according to the story, he has the thing created. And then they put it into the temple. They worship it. They burn incense to it. It goes on for centuries, and no one has a problem with it. Hezekiah comes along. He has this reformist attitude about monotheistic worship. He wants the people to do this. He starts taking all the other gods out of there. No instruction from God to tell him to do this. No complaints from God for the hundreds of years that this was happening. It didn't seem to be a problem. And it was only a problem for Hezekiah. And that's part of what I talked about the last time we discussed this, was monotheism is simply looking at the Bible and saying, I'm only going to look at the people who had a monotheistic view, and I'm going to say they were right. And all those thousands and millions of other people in the Bible who had a henotheistic view of their religion and of Yahweh's instruction, I'm going to just say that's just wrong. And it doesn't matter whether that's what's actually in the Bible or not. I'm just going to look at the thing that supports what I believe, and I'm going to say that's how I'm going to view it. And the people that disagree with it, that are also mentioned in the Bible, all those people that were burning incense to Nehushtan and worshiping at the Asherah poles, those people were just, it was just wrong. It was wrong. Hezekiah was right. It's like, okay, one man is right over the whole 12 tribes of Israel for centuries that Yahweh had no problem with. I mean, take it however you want to take it, but it's a little bit biased.
And it's common for them to say, this is God's word and every word is true, etc. But I'm going to pick and choose which verses I'm going to pay attention to.
But I mean, you can't look at that and see that the people were doing it and say that Hezekiah's view was not in the minority. Hezekiah did not have a common interpretation of the Hebrew religion. And it even says in that passage in 2 Kings 18 that after him there was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor among those who were before him, for he clung to the Lord, and he did not depart from following him. And I mean, so it's basically saying there was nobody quite like Hezekiah when it came to his monotheistic view. I mean, he had this really unique view that wasn't shared, and that was just simply Hezekiah's opinion. But he kept, Yahweh's commandments, which the Lord had commanded Moses. Ironically, the Lord commanded the production of Nehushtan. And this is an example of monotheistic thinking which is not in line with the henotheism that was actually practiced by the Hebrews. And the Bible records that it wasn't practiced by the Hebrews. I mean, this is not up for debate. I mean, it's in the Bible. And the thing about John that you were about to talk about, that's why I had to go into the Greek parallel with
I only know this because it's really close to another verse that everybody has to memorize.
Well, the reason I had started this with the Greek Asclepius and his snake on a pole and why that represents life and healing is because, of course, the Nehushtan story in the Old Testament also shows that particular symbol of the snake on the pole was also representing life and healing. The people went to it for healing and to live when they were, in mortal peril. So these, it's not just a matter of they're the same symbol. They also seem to have a very similarly related meaning. I mean, these two things seem to be very related. And I wouldn't doubt that they're, connected mythologically and that some of them are not based on one another or one is not based on the other. I don't know. But I don't think you can deny the similarities there. But in John 3:14 is the last mention of Nehushtan, and it's from Jesus. And Jesus says in John 3:14, which everybody knows John 3:16 because you see the guy at the football games. God so loved the world. Well, let's back up 2 verses and let's see what Jesus says about this idol. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life.
So if you burn incense to Jesus, you'll be cured of snake bite.
Well,
or something similar.
What Jesus is doing is drawing a parallel between himself and Nehushtan, and he's saying just like the people were saved, their lives were saved in the wilderness by the snake, they're going to be saved by me and when they raise me on the pole. And so that was the thing. He was comparing himself to this snake, that him and the snake were parallel in that regard, that they would offer salvation. If Nehushtan is related to the Greek demigod Asclepius and his snake symbol denoting life, the connection that Jesus makes even more sense. I need to back up now. I had to sort of skip to those verses, but just to go on about, I mentioned the copper mines, but many copper snake statues have been unearthed in excavations near Midian and Timnah. Since the story indicates Moses married a Midianite, okay, I mean, this kind of makes sense. You have this Midianite god that is a snake, a copper snake, and then you have Moses making a copper snake. And in, of course, the Bible story, it says that God tells him to do it, but this is a Midianite god. He was married to a Midianite, and he made this snake as a means to save people. You've got a snake god who heals people, and you've got Moses making a copper snake to heal people. I mean, it's just, you can't miss the connection.
You have to fight.
Yeah, you have to really
fight
try
not
to
to see this stuff. I mean, it's not. I love this topic. I have this perversion about belief in religion. All things about religion, but belief and history and philosophy and all this, just really, I enjoy it. I know a lot of other people do too. But it amazes me, we were talking about how, when we're Christians, you read the Bible, and some people would say you read it with the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And turns out, from my perspective, what the guidance of the Holy Spirit are like these horse blinders that let you focus on what you want to see and ignore the rest.
Well, I think the guidance of the Holy Spirit is just whatever particular doctrine you're being told that you need to adhere to. Because every church I know that offers any kind of doctrinal superiority, I guess you'd call it, not all of them do, but a lot of churches, especially in the fundamentalist branch, will say, the way we're looking at it is the accurate way to look at it. Right. And when you have that, when you're raised in that, basically they're telling you that if you're reading this and you're not seeing what we're telling you to see, you're not reading it right.
You're wrong.
Yeah. So, if and what do? You end up with everybody being raised in a different branch that they're all being told the way we look at it is right, and nobody else is looking at it honestly. And it's just, you end up with a hodgepodge of belief systems, which is exactly what we have, and everyone thinks they've got the truth. And so anyway, this is a clue, the Midianite wife is a clue that the Old Testament writers and editors were aware of a connection between Midian and the copper snake deity. At least one of these statues is said to be within a temple that appears to match the biblical description of the tabernacle, which would make sense if they're saying that, if the Bible itself is saying that a statue of Nehushtan was in the tabernacle at one time. It was found in a copper mine at Timnah, and it was known to have been inhabited by Midianites at one time. Also, it was thought to have been the home to the Israelites for a time, and another similar statue was also found at Tadmor. In the mythologies...
Well, the Midianites, by the way, are the people that Moses had them go kill and steal all the virgins from.
Okay.
So.
Well, they must have been good. Moses swore by them.
Yeah.
I mean, he had himself a Midianite wife, so they were probably little hotties. I don't know. But... let's see, we went through the mythology with Yahoo and the snake and Hezekiah. The myth of the serpent in the garden we just touched on, but he was the wisest creature, and that may be related to Nehushtan. The Hebrew word for snake, there's another Hebrew word for snake, which is armumi, which also means cunning and crafty, which sort of goes along with the Eden story. And it absolutely is common in mythology for gods to work against one another. That happens all the time. And in the story of Eden, it would be a classic example of that sort of a tale of two gods sort of playing one another. It would also fit in...
Like when they messed with Job.
Yeah, you have, basically God and another, whatever you want to call it, demigod, demi-deity, demon, whatever you want to say, but some sort of divine creature that was bargaining and fighting with God and kind of being antagonistic.
Let's put a magnifying glass above these ants and see what they do.
But it would also fit in with the context developed later where Yahweh is in a constant struggle for power against other deities, which is what we talked about the last time I was here. I won't go rehash that. But yeah, I mean, you have this ongoing power struggle with Yahweh and all these other gods. He's constantly, jealous of what's going on. Not surprisingly, since Yahweh is the patron god of Israel, he defeats the serpent in total victory. And we see that he does it more than once.
Dun, dun, dun.
Let's see. We talked about the Egyptian battle with Moses and the serpent on the pole, or I guess the staff that becomes a serpent. And just to give a source, it was Elil Arbel is the one that claimed that Jewish mythology was riddled with characters of the wise snake. I'm going to throw that out there. I didn't search super hard, but I didn't find confirmation of that, and I'm really not sure. I saw a lot of writing by this Elil Arbel and some reviews, but I really couldn't get a pinpoint on her credentials or what exactly her... I don't know who she is, but she seems to be doing a lot of writing on religion, and some of her stuff wasn't as... It was posted in a very professional way, but it wasn't as footnoted as I normally like to see papers done. So I was a lot of her stuff, even though I found it interesting, I tended not to use it unless I could verify it. And that was one of the things that she said that was interesting, but I just want to make it clear that I'm not making this claim and that she was not so good about verifying her stuff as far as footnotes.
Yeah, and I'm no expert on Judaism. I've
Right.
been looking to get,
Right.
obviously the Old Testament, for the most part, is very similar to the Tanakh. But what I've been looking for is a non-Hebrew Talmud, a collection of other writings like that explain it. And I think I'm going to have to get like an encyclopedic source that kind of sums it up, because I don't want to spend forever reviewing every religion.
Well, that's everything I've got on Nehushtan, and I think that's probably a good stopping point.
And that was actually, I think it's one of the best ones you could pull out because it shows a lot. And I noticed, we're getting ready to go to calls. The call lines are full now, actually. It wasn't until we hit the New Testament verse that the lines lit up. So I don't necessarily know what everybody wants to talk about, but I did find that interesting. But maybe they figured we were close to done.
I hadn't noticed that, but
So as a quick reminder, we're live. It's September 17th, 2006. After today's program, we'll be going to Threadgill's for dinner. Some of us will be. Yeah, that's not the right title. We normally get there about 6:30 or so. It's at 301 West Riverside at Barton Springs. So without any further ado, we'll go to callers and try to get to as many as we possibly can before time runs out. So we've got Matthew.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Hey.
Nice name.
Very biblical.
Like you were talking about this topic a couple weeks ago, and somebody called in and said something like, I don't know why you're talking about this stuff, and
Yeah.
you shouldn't be talking about this stuff, or something like that.
They want us to talk about evolution.
Yeah, see, I'm really glad that you're talking about this stuff because I've been studying a lot of the same topics in terms of how these things that are considered myths are actually what Judaism and, in fact, Christianity are based on. And I've got a book in front of me. It's called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's by Manly P. Hall, and the original title page says an encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy.
Wow.
Being an interpretation of the secret teachings concealed within the rituals, allegories, and mysteries of all ages.
Holy cow.
How big is this book?
It's not really thick, but it's the print.
It's got a big
Tiny
cover.
type.
Is very, very small. The copy I have is actually from like 1972, but it was originally printed in, I think, 1929.
Oh, okay.
And it's a pretty good book for the topics that you're discussing because they go in. There's a chapter in the back called Mystic Christianity, and what that kind of reveals is a lot of the stuff about Jesus in the New Testament is actually taken from earlier mythologies. That being like even like back to Egyptian mythology. What's really interesting to me, you're talking about how like some of these gods, these ancient gods, I agree with you in terms of the fact that certain people just become monotheistic. They just read the Bible and they pick and say, well, this is the God that I want to follow. It's pretty strange to me how all these, I mean, everyone knows that Roman and Greek gods are kind of interchangeable.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But those gods are actually interchangeable with Egyptian gods, too.
Yes.
Like Hermes is, and Mercury kind of equal Thoth or whatever from Egypt, which is like the messenger of the gods. And you're talking about this stuff, and it's kind of funny how these symbols are all around us.
Yeah.
You know, like you were talking about the caduceus and stuff being in terms of, anytime you see on the news anything about medicine, they flash a caduceus up on the screen and stuff.
Look up the Hippocratic Oath sometime. You won't believe it. I mean, it's like all about their oath to the gods, it's an oath to the gods.
Yeah.
It's a polytheistic oath that these doctors take. I'm sure they would excuse you, like if you had some religious reason to not want to take it, like if you were really objecting to it. But most of the students take it. They don't think twice about it. And it's all about, we promise the gods.
Yeah, it's kind of strange that way. I mean, I actually called in like a year ago and was talking to Matt about how a lot of these symbols of these really, really ancient mythologies or religions are kind of, they're on the top of the state capitol and stuff. And you said that once a religion dies, that those things just become kind of like art.
We were talking about what could be allowed, specifically like on the Supreme Court friezes where there's a bunch of representations of different gods who generally nobody probably believes in. And I think we were talking a little bit about what can be allowed and what would qualify as a secular environment. And some of those things, which used to be religious, now would just probably be considered art. It's like if you found a statue of Dionysus, yes, it represents a religion, but, there's with nobody actively pushing a Dionysus movement as a real religion, it kind of, I don't know if it fits in the same category. It's more history than,
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of, I kind of think that there are people practicing certain religions that you would think were dead that weren't, and they're not really out. I hate to sound conspiratorial, but they're not really out in the open. They're not.
That's good because I have a new policy where I just hang up on conspiracy theorists. But
Well,
that's completely separate. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like Tracy, you were talking about the divine presence of Shekinah.
Yes.
And how that kind of freaked you out that it was so that word or that phrase was so close to shock and awe in the
Yeah, and being a Middle Eastern biblical term, yeah, and invasion of the Middle East and
Babylon
Christians coming
basically.
to kick your Muslim butt. I mean, it's like, it was just scary.
Yeah,
but
'cause
I mean,
the-
I know it was paranoid and I disclaimed it.
Well, what's even weirder about that is like that Shekinah was actually like a cloud that they were following.
Oh, now that was part of the volcano. People tend to think of that story as God being right in front of them, like there was a pillar of fire right in front of them at night and a pile of smoke.
Because that's the way it's portrayed.
Right, but if you think about it, they're heading toward a mountain, okay?
Yeah.
That spits fire. And
Yeah, I'm
there's
not
a
saying I
column of
believe
smoke.
that was God they were seeing or anything, but they interpreted
Right.
that. It's
Right.
also in the.
But he did hang out like a cloud in the temple or in the tabernacle
Yeah.
for a
Yeah,
while.
that's
so
what I was
yeah.
gonna say, is
And I
that-
don't think there was volcanoes in the tabernacle.
Just lots of incense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Boy, it's
exactly.
smoky in here. What have you guys been smoking?
Yeah, I mean that's basically like when you look at Islam and stuff and a lot of this stuff. You know, you can tell that these people were taking drugs and that they were having epileptic fits and visions and stuff like that. And you know, it for what it's worth, you know, a long time ago, we didn't have what we have now in terms of understanding how magnets work or stuff like that.
Right.
So you could trick people really easily
Right.
into thinking that you
If
were
your
God.
level of knowledge is low, I mean, you know, it's a,
In a society where no one's literate, you know, the guy who reads is king or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what that. Yeah.
And that brings me back to the book I was talking about earlier.
and the magician
that-
is the priest.
Yeah, I mean, you had back then everyone was illiterate and stuff, so they had to have people to interpret. You know, they would. That's what the preacher comes from. You know, like somebody standing there reading you the Bible because you can't read it yourself
Right.
and telling you what
Like
it
the
is.
liturgy.
But then beyond that, a lot of the early stuff was so visual. There was symbols. Everything had a symbol, like you're talking about the snake and everything. So, and that's really big in, you know, Freemasonry and all these things is symbolical philosophy. And I propose that a lot of these early gods, the ones that they didn't just make up, were actually just people that kind of tricked people into following them and stuff. You know, I mean, it's like I read something in this book about how they were talking about the Greek gods, and they're like, you know, the people at the upper levels of society there knew that these gods didn't really exist. But they kind of used it the same way they use
Sure.
religion now to keep everyone in
Yeah,
in
I
line.
think you can do it either way with a real person as the basis.
Yeah.
And sometimes without the real person may actually be easier.
Caesar was a god. I mean,
Yeah,
Caesar
oh.
was designated a god.
Exactly.
So yeah. I
Well,
mean,
every Chinese emperor
Yeah.
was the divine. I mean, if you couldn't go into the Forbidden Palace because that was the home of the divine, and the emperor was the divine on earth. So, I gotta. We're running out of time because we went a little long with 2 topics today. I'm gonna have to cut you off so we get to some other callers. But thanks
okay.
a lot for calling, Matt.
Thanks.
And call back in, you know, next week, some other week, whatever. We're gonna try and get through as many callers as we can, and we'll try not to do super long
Okay.
stuff next time. But I had to get to my human sacrifice
Sure.
story from last week.
well,
so.
no, you owed that.
And we got Scott. How you doing?
Hey, good. How you doing?
Good.
Great.
I didn't catch the whole program, so I don't know if I just missed it or what. But I know that in the Jewish symbolism, that the snake. I heard you say crafty
Yeah.
as one of the things it symbolizes, sly.
Right.
But you can take it even a step further and call it just outright deceitful.
No, he was more of a
Jesus making a
clever.
reference because Satan was represented by the snake and the Leviathan. The idea of Satan changed as time went by, but that remained a
Yeah, the
symbolism.
idea definitely changed because
Yeah, it did
he's the accuser. He's somebody who actually works for God in the Old
That's
Testament.
exactly. Now you bring up an excellent point, and that's kind of where I'm going with this. Jesus calls him the father of lies. He was a liar from the beginning in the garden. And it's funny. I'm glad to hear y'all bringing it up about the snake on the pole and the snakes, with a staff. That Aaron throws a staff on the ground, but
that was something
I wanted to bring that up because if you look at the snake as being a symbol of deceit, and when you have the staff thrown down, it becomes a symbol of deceit, which seemed weird to me. but then it eats two snakes, two symbols of deceit.
Right.
And then what you have is you have when they're being bit by vipers, which are, and the poison is all, you can go through the Old Testament, the symbolism's all there about the poison is, what it does to you from the deceit, believing a lie or being deceived. And they look at a symbol of deceit.
Yeah.
And what I'll leave is and then Jesus comparing himself to, and I'll bring up one thing Jesus says. I won't go any further. I'll just let you consider it. Jesus says something very interesting. He's talking about blasphemy. He says, all sin and blasphemy will be forgiven man, even blasphemy against the Son of Man.
But not the Holy Spirit.
But not against, and actually the Spirit of truth will not be forgiven in this age or the age to come. And I'll say one thing and I'll let you go. I'd like to meet you guys one day and talk more, but I want to let some other callers go. There's an old Eastern saying, even a thorn can be dislodged by the means of another thorn.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll concentrate on that. And,
hurry with
I don't know
something
for
else.
sure how many of us are actually going to Thread Gills tonight. There's a chance that it may be really packed because of some other events going on there. But if you want to meet up with us sometime, there's lots of events that we do, and you're also welcome to come down to Thread Gills for an after-show dinner, if not this week, some other week.
It'll have to be another time.
Because I'm not sure I'll be
currently
there this
can't,
week
but,
either. But
I appreciate y'all's time.
Sure.
thanks, Scott.
I have something really quick that I forgot to mention that he brought up that made me think about it. He mentioned Aaron. Both Moses and Aaron were, of course, venerated. They were, you had two, Moses came from the northern tribes, and Aaron, of course, did not. And the destruction of Nehushtan in the temple was not only a religious statement by Hezekiah, it would have been a huge political statement as well. And that was something very important that I forgot to bring up. In the northern kingdom, Moses was considered a hero, and this would have been an affront to them. So destroying Nehushtan, the thing that symbolized Moses in the wilderness, would have really raised the ire of the northern kingdom. But the priests of Aaron would have been probably pretty happy to see that symbol come down, because Moses was always held over them as the superior to Aaron.
Yeah. Why can't you be more like your brother?
Yeah, when you have Moses being brought down out of the temple, so from the high places, knocked out of the high places, that's going to make the priests of Aaron much more happy than the northern Israelites. So it was, you can't really disregard either that in Hezekiah's decision it may have been, a little bit of political in addition to whatever his religious opinions were. That was it.
All righty. Let's go on to Alan. How you doing?
Hey guys, I just tuned you on. You have a very friendly demeanor.
Well, some of us do.
That's great.
I don't always.
I'd like to, I was looking at my Encyclopedia Americana about a definition of religion,
Oh, boy.
and it said any definition of religion, any modern definition of religion, should include communism and Nazism. And the reason for this is it and I believe this, that it gives a generic definition of religion as a set of core values and beliefs by which a person gives the meaning to their life. Now, meaning in a sense, like if somebody is a school teacher and they really believe in education, they think the world's going to be better. If everybody gets educated, learns how to spell, learns how to read, the world's going to get better. And that is basically their religion. That's what gets them out of bed in the morning. Now, I was wondering what your thoughts are on a generic definition of religion.
I mean, if you're asking us to define it, I would let Matt take that, but I would say that as long as they predefine it and say this is what we're calling a religion, then yeah, you can throw whatever you want in there as long as you're clear about what you're calling a religion.
My point of view would be that particular definition is overly broad, because if it's just going to be any set of beliefs, then what use do we have for the word philosophy? If we're going to delineate between philosophy and call religion a subset of philosophy, whereas a philosophy is a particular system of beliefs or a way of looking at things, But religion needs to be a subset of that for which there is something more, a way to address, as the Supreme Court put it, questions of ultimate importance or ultimate concern.
That's what for each individual, I mean, they need something to get them out of the bed in the
Sure, but
morning
yeah,
and
if somebody
go to work
comes to me and says,
now, philosophy doesn't always do that. A philosophy is probably broader than a religion, but I mean, without a religion, you don't have any interest in philosophy.
well, see, that's what I'm saying. I don't necessarily see that, because what I would see is philosophy is this big circle and religion is a smaller circle inside of it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, if somebody has a philosophy but no religion, they commit suicide.
No, I have a philosophy and no religion, and I haven't committed
Well, that's
suicide.
because you don't accept the America. What I'm saying is the broader definition of religion, which I think, for example, the U.S. Constitution, when it was written, unlike modern legislation where they define the words that they use, the Constitution did not define religion,
Right.
and it should have. And it would have it would have solved a lot of problems if they had defined religion and a few other words, like speech.
Although the nice thing is that we can go back and redefine things. I mean, it's essentially a living document. So while they might have had a gap there, we've sufficiently defined what the Constitution means with regard to the First Amendment over the last 230 years or so.
Well,
But yeah,
but anyhow, that's I think that what we need is a more practical, a broader definition of religion, and I think that if you folks had to wrestle with what religion really is, then you'd see that we all are looking for meaning, and
Sure.
I think atheists are kind of smug into thinking that other people have to come up with a God in order to give meaning to their life, whereas you are so clever that you can give meaning to your life.
it's not. I don't see it that way at all. What I see it as is, if somebody wants to claim that a God actually exists, if that's what gives their life meaning, that's fine. But there's no evidence to support it. There's no reason to believe it.
Yeah, but that's what. Look, I don't. I mean, your attack on people whose religion involves God is ridiculous. Because, I mean, I
No,
don't attack
no,
you
sir.
for not believing it. I mean, if you can find meaning in your life without God, that is fine.
Yeah.
And the lovely lady next to you, I don't attack you for that.
Well, I'm not attacking you either, but I am going to
Well,
attack.
no, why? Yeah, because you don't know.
Hang on.
What my
Hang on. I put you on hold. I didn't hang up. What I'm saying here is that I'm not attacking you either. I am attacking beliefs. Okay? If you tell me that you believe in leprechauns, I'm going to point out that that's a silly, unsupported belief, and I'm going to be attacking that belief. If you take it personal, that's an issue you've got to work out for yourself. I'm not attacking individuals. I only talked about their beliefs and the actions they take on behalf of those beliefs. So,
very good. Yeah, but you, I mean, there are things you believe in, right? You believe in education, for example?
sure. Do you think that's ridiculous?
No.
Then
but
there's
I
no
think
reason
some
to attack
people,
that belief either.
Some people, that is their religion.
Okay,
because that's all
I
they need.
understand. You could say football is some people's religion.
Sure.
Yes,
But I think when
so.
you use a definition that is that broad, that you make it useless.
No.
Because there already are plenty of
What's wrong with
definitions for
everyone having
philosophies and
religion?
religion.
What's wrong with everyone having a religion? What's wrong with that?
Well, and by your definition, nothing.
Yeah, and
The
I'm
only people
kind
who
of
go
blowing
ahead.
time
I'm
with
sorry,
this.
ma'am.
I was just saying that, I mean, if the purpose is just to simply say that, some people are going to define religion as something that people do religiously or that they believe religiously, even though it has nothing to do with supernatural beliefs, and if you want to say, hey, there's people that define it that way, that's fine. Is there more to the call than that, or is that the point?
No, I was just. I just wanted. I just. My one of my hot buttons is that I think we need a much broader definition of religion. I think
Okay.
in the U.S. Constitution, I wish they had defined it. They probably wouldn't have used my definition or the Encyclopedia Americana's definition, but they should have defined what the H they meant.
Okay,
Thanks
Thanks
for
a lot.
calling.
thanks. I happen to think that the broader definitions get, the more useless they become.
Well, sure.
We're trying to, define. Kind of fine is in there, that fine tuning. And when you make the define by your definition of religion, yes, I have a religion. It's not atheism, because atheism is simply a lack of belief in a God. There is no dogma or tenets or code or list of moral precepts. I would say that if by your definition I have a number of religions, I'm a humanist, I'm a rationalist, I'm a materialist, etc. And that raises, I think, another problem with having a broad definition, because then all of a sudden you have multiple definitions. It's much more practical to talk about, if you're going to say religion, let's get it so that you can fine tune to say what recognized religion you are, or what category of religion it is. And these broad things, we can just leave open to list your beliefs. What is it that you believe? But like I said before, I'm sorry if you thought that we were attacking people. I'm attacking ideas, and I'm attacking. I happen to think that Christianity is one of the most immoral, repulsive, asinine religions anybody could possibly think up, and that's because I see the immorality and the hypocrisy, and people who look at this religion and say, "Oh, it's all about loving thy neighbor and everything else," and yet we've shown today and on many other shows that's not the case. And so I will poke fun at, I will ridicule, I will talk nastily about those concepts, because things that are ridiculous are deserving of ridicule. And if somebody happens to take it personally, I'm sorry, I didn't make your choices for you on what to believe. If I look at that belief in as much the same way as I and probably you would look at somebody who believes that they've got a fairy living in their inner ear who's whispering, the winning lottery numbers to them, but they don't ever play them. To me, it's kind of on the same page. But let's go on to Jack. We just got a couple minutes left. What's up, Jack?
You guys seem to be experts on the Bible, or at least very familiar with it. And I just wonder, it seems to me like the subject we're talking about is an on or off switch. It's either exists or it doesn't exist. And it doesn't, why have y'all spent so much time studying the Bible? And that's basically my question.
Okay. We'll let you go, and Tracy can start.
Yeah, just quickly. I spent a lot of time studying the Bible because I was a fundamentalist Christian for many years.
Yeah, and I study it for much the same reason, but also because I find it interesting. We do live in a society where 75-80% of the population think that this is God's word, that this is the manual for how you're supposed to live your life. And I think that refuting that and pointing out those things helps to wake some of those people up, because it's what woke me up. I read a verse about an indictment about the Elijah story, where some kids call Elijah bald-headed, and God sends 2 she-bears to kill 42 kids. And boy, that just kind of had my brain doing backflips for a second, because that made no sense. As for, why focus on the Bible and why not focus more on general arguments for and against the existence of God, we'll do that too, because that's my second favorite thing. My favorite thing is to focus on Christianity, because it's what I'm familiar with and what I find interesting. But the broader philosophical discussions, whether you're talking about, teleological arguments or ontological arguments, or even specific arguments to other religions, I love that stuff too, which is one of the reasons why I focused on the wiki. But real quick, we got David. You get to be the last call. We're running out of time. What do you got?
I just wondered if either of you practice yoga or do any meditation of any kind.
I take yoga and I do meditation.
And I don't.
I'd like to know how you meditate and give you my system of meditation that reveals God to me.
My meditation doesn't reveal God. It's simply clearing your mind of thoughts.
I think that that's a left brain idea, and the right brain is, the left brain handles things like logic and reasoning and mathematics and science, and the right brain handles things like intuition, psychic phenomena, and theological phenomena.
Can you actually demonstrate that any supernatural psychic phenomenon or anything like that actually exists?
I think that if you meditate, you learn to see things through the right brain, and you gather all the evidence that you need for believing in God. I was an atheist for 15 years.
Could you demonstrate it to anybody else?
if you teach people how to meditate in the correct way.
Well,
But
you know,
Buddhists
I
meditate
could
and
give
it's just-
I could give people LSD and
Well, but I mean, meditation is just clearing your head. It's turning your thoughts off. That's what that is. I mean, that's how that's
turning-
what Buddhism and Hinduism.
The way
and,
I meditate is that I relax until my stream of consciousness stops.
I gotta actually cut you off. We only got like 15 seconds left. I'm sorry
Okay,
you
maybe
called
I'll
at the
call you
end.
back.
Feel free to email tv@atheist-community.org. Call back next week. We'll be happy to discuss it. But in general, if you can't prove it, it doesn't exist. Thanks a lot. We'll see you all next week. And don't forget about the Bat Cruise next Saturday. Bye-bye.